40 years ago, Northern Ireland embarked on one of the largest and least understood projects of our recent past. There's supposed to be a city here.
Welcome to Craig Avenue.
A city of 200,000 people, living in bright modern houses, with bright modern jobs and a lifestyle that's the envy of the world. It's a city of tomorrow, and it was finished in the year 2000, according to the plans. Complete with a high-speed mass transit system and vibrant local neighbourhoods linked by road, rail and cycle path to a thriving city centre. Some of it even exists, and some of it doesn't. So where is it? Where is the lost city of Craigavon? The construction of Craigavon was well underway by the year I was born, 1969. By the time I reached secondary school, why Craigavon failed was already a subject on the geography syllabus. Gone to the dark. But as a child, I hadn't noticed the failure of Craigavon. The new city was an enormous playground full of hidden cycle paths, disappearing roads, and futuristic buildings standing empty in a science fiction landscape. Today, for me, it still has that magical quality. Cycling around the city centre on a grey summer's day, Craigavon looks nearly beautiful. It was only when I moved away from the Craigavon area that I really realised what a joke it is in the rest of Northern Ireland. Being from Portadown, I'm well used to the idea that where I come from is a bit of a laughingstock or the butt of jokes. But those jokes tend to be accurate about Portadown, to be honest with you. Craigavon is just a black hole in people's knowledge of this part of the country. I think what most interests me about Craigavon is the naive optimism of the original vision, the idea that you could just build a completely new city in the middle of nowhere from scratch. But of course, that optimism was the spirit of the times. In the 1960s, people viewed planning as a science that could solve social and economic problems with mathematical precision. Across the UK, from Milton Keynes in England to Cumbernauld in Scotland, whole new cities were plotted like points on a graph. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Now, my girl, you're so young and pretty. Henry, before I ask you this question as a professor, I want to ask you just as a citizen of Northern Ireland, when you hear the word Craigavon, what do you think?
I think the word that comes into my mind was failure.
Watch my daddy in bed at night. It seems pretty naive now to think that you can build a new city anywhere. Do you think it's particularly naive to think you can build one in a bog between Lurgan and Portadown?
Well, it was part of the zeitgeist, if you can use that term, of the time. The notion of new cities, the notion of planning, new forms of infrastructure. It was seen as at the forefront of progress, not just in Northern Ireland, but throughout the United Kingdom.
Almost half mankind now lives in cities. If present trends continue unchecked, everyone in the world could be living in an urban area. We gotta get out of this place. There's a better life for me and you.
I think we've got to avoid looking back in the 60s from the prism of the Troubles and the divisions, because in the early and mid-60s was a time of quite a lot of optimism, and you got a new Prime Minister, Terence O'Neill, who's making different sorts of sounds about the need to transform the face of Ulster to move into a new era.
Ulster's face at the start of the 60s was particularly grubby. Traditional industries were in decline, nothing had emerged to take their place, and all progress on housing was mired in tribal politics. All these problems reached their squalid peak in Northern Ireland's only real city.
Belfast, the capital of that odd-shaped corner of the United Kingdom which lies outside Great Britain. If Northern Ireland was to avoid becoming the national assistance province, something drastic had to be done.
In 1963, the Matthew Report first proposed that drastic something. Belfast would be demagnetised by luring its surplus population to a completely new city, joining Portadown and Lurgan with two new towns called Brownlow and Mandeville to form a single huge conurbation. All this was in line with the thinking of the time. Add in Stormont's long-running rivalry with the near-autonomous Belfast Corporation, and the Northern Ireland government was only too happy to start the future somewhere else.
At present, Craigavon is 3.5 miles of open country between the towns of Lurgan and Portadown. But 10 years from now, a new city will stand here, a new base for industry.
Stormont approved the Matthew Report in 1965. A new Towns Act was passed into law, a development commission was set up to build and run the entire project, and the men in hard hats got to work. That's how things were done before we invented the 10-year public inquiry.
It's a scheme on a grand scale, and it'll cost hundreds of millions of pounds. But remember, the problem's on a grand scale too.
The first problem emerged straight away. Craigavon was named after James Craig, Northern Ireland's first Prime Minister. The name was chosen to placate hardliners in the Unionist government, who thought the whole thing smacked of socialism and an unhealthy mingling of the tribes.
Well, candidly speaking, I'm very disappointed. I thought that a more musical name could have been picked. To me, it's very harsh. I think that a name like Lissaker, one of our little local districts, would have been much finer.
It's very appropriate and something that will go down in history so far as this country is concerned.
The planners were reportedly appalled by the choice of the name. One tells the Telegraph here that he was too shocked to speak when told about the name. Another said, "It could have been worse, but I'm surprised and disappointed." In May 1965, the Belfast Telegraph ran a series of articles called The Creation of a City with its new city correspondent, Alf McCreary. In the first one, it imagines life in 1981. Mr. McCreary wrote about a family from London who appreciated living in Craigavon because of its marina, university and airport. They like the new city for practical reasons. It is safe for kids, it has steady jobs, they are near beautiful countryside. Despite the name, a great deal of progressive thinking went into Craigavon. However, none of this was going to work without jobs, and that's where the planners' faith turned mainly to hope and charity.
But across the sea in Northern Ireland seemed to most businessmen to be the ideal place not to put a factory. The country might be green and romantic, it was also remote and mightily hard up.
Unable to plan a private sector from scratch, Stormont's Ministry of Commerce took a field of dreams approach. If you build it, they will come.
You're a member of the Industrial Development Division of the Ministry of Commerce of Northern Ireland, and you have the job of selling these factories. Well, go ahead, sell me one.
A firm can be helped to the very attractive extent of £200,000 in a year. And when they arrive in Northern Ireland, they may be lucky enough to find something like this waiting for them.
The new city couldn't attract people without jobs, and in the 1960s that meant a major manufacturing plant. No doubt the planners would have preferred a tractor factory, but what they actually got, after hawking grants around every boardroom in the Western world, was Goodyear.
The Goodyear factory, £7 million worth of it, will be the firm's main supplier of industrial rubber products for Britain, the whole of Europe and many countries abroad. One of the American executives here describes Craigavon as a new concept in cooperation between business and government.
This enormous factory was built by Harland and Wolff, not a great omen, and opened in 1967, complete with its own railway station. Within a few years, it was employing a quarter of the new city's working population. Today, the factory has been reincarnated as a business park, and there's even talk of reopening that railway station. Noel Bibb and Tony Moore were original Goodyear employees. They haven't been back here since the firm pulled out in 1983.
I remember a fella coming into the bar in Lurgan and saying, anybody want a job in Goodyear? It was as on £9 a week, and my job, getting £27, 3 times it, so away we went, down to Goodyear.
But then the turnover of labour was unbelievable. The whole Doles was all wiped out. The lame, the blind, the sick moved in here. One Monday and all moved out the next Monday, do you know what I mean? But after it grew and started to establish itself, there was nothing ever to beat it. Even yet, 39 years later, I feel it for it now, you know.
Sure, the fellas had their own wee farm down the road there, and they were in here working 3 to 11 shift, and they got a call, the cows calving away, they went out and back in again.
Most of us have come from a background of linen, farm labourers and things of that nature. And then when you just imagine coming into, at 18 or 21 years of age, into a situation where it was alien to you, and you never seen a machine in your life. And Goodyear themselves mounted a big campaign prior to the building, and they promised the moon at the time, £30 a week, that was a fortune.
And they wanted people to move to Craigavon?
Yes, and then what happened, just at that particular time, the houses went up, and this was the start of this whole new vision. This was the main plank for the rest of the province to come down to fill Craigavon.
Thousands of people did pack up and move to Craigavon, not just from Belfast, but from all over Northern Ireland. The concept of the new city obviously had an appeal because rents were initially much higher than elsewhere, and residents paid a premium to be urban pioneers.
You see, what we've tried to do here, maybe in a fumbling sort of way, is to create a town and not a collection of housing estates.
These weren't refugees from the slums. They were ambitious, idealistic young families, staking their claim in the future.
Some years ago, in offices across this little land, learned men sat down together. A new city then was planned. New houses here for everyone. They moved in thick and fast. Their hopes were high, so sure were they, their future safe at last.
Madge, you had a large family and a life in Belfast. Why would someone in that situation up sticks and move to a place like Craigavon?
Well, I was in Dunmurry, the firm that my husband worked for. The manager of it was a friend of his, and he had got the job of employment manager in Goodyear, and he encouraged us to come. Making a move to anywhere is chancy, but with the idea of being able to get work and get good houses, it was a better outlook for my family, and I could see in my mind's eye the new city growing.
And what were your first impressions when you arrived here?
Well, I am actually from the country, and I thought, it's brilliant, it's country and town together, if you know what I mean. We could see, and well, maybe this is what we wanted to see, that it was going to be a success.
Already, visitors from 50 countries have come to see for themselves this latest thing in new towns.
We've now come off the M1 to the M12, which must be the world's shortest motorway, and which, interestingly, is the only motorway in the UK to have a roundabout in the middle of it. This is your welcome to Craigavon, a complete shock as you suddenly come up on a roundabout at 70 miles an hour. Roundabouts absolutely define Craigavon because you couldn't imagine it without them, but there's no doubt that they are extremely annoying to drive around. One of the strangest things about driving through Craigavon is that you can't see anything, and you're not meant to. The roads are hidden away like service pipes. You'd never guess that we were driving right now through the main road in the middle of town. You can't see anything, although the main part of Brownlow is just over there, and the Balancing Lakes are just 10 yards that way. They're called the Balancing Lakes because they balance the water table and stop this drained bog turning back into a bog. The leisure potential is just an added attraction. and leisure is Craigavon's greatest attraction. The sports facilities here were built for 200,000 people, and only a tenth of that number showed up.
Afternoon, Newton. How you doing?
Nice to meet you. Grant. Declan, tell me about the site we're looking at now. It's a very unusual site, isn't it, really, in the middle of Craigavon?
I suppose it's Craigavon answer to the Alps, but part of the new development, well over 30 years ago, they decided to have a few unique leisure facilities, the ski slope being one of them.
Can you see now, even though you're the manager of the centre, why the ski slope does sort of sum up for a lot of people why Craigavon is a very strange place?
I think they were probably, in the commission in them days, were looking for things that would make it, you know, the full package. And perhaps somebody there was a skier 35 years ago and decided, let's build a slope.
Do you think that maybe it was seen as glamorous and futuristic?
Well, new city, you know, new slate, something new. Come to Craigavon. There's lots of new things that you can't get elsewhere, and perhaps that was part and parcel of it.
Nice. Whoa! Well, that really is just like skiing on real snow. It is the Alps in Craigavon. Even Craigavon's conventional amenities had a new city twist. This park contained demonstration gardens to inspire new residents who might never have had a garden before. Then there was the zoo. Craigavon's planners thought that the city would be so heavily populated and urbanised by now that children who lived here would need a petting zoo to understand what farms and farm animals look like. The irony is that land was taken off real farmers and actual farms were destroyed to create the site to build this fake farm in the middle of nowhere.
From the top of this hill here, you can get a view of a typical bit of Ulster. But every man in this district owns his land and works it himself with his family, like I do.
Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more.
Craigavon wasn't built on an empty wilderness. There were hundreds of small farms here and hundreds of small farmers. They were all informed by letter that their land and houses would be vested at market rates. There was no appeal, and that was that. In total, the Craigavon Development Commission seized 6,000 acres at about £250 an acre. Alwyn and Leslie Sinton miraculously kept their house, which is now marooned between the east and westbound lanes of the central dual carriageway. Hello.
Hello. Good morning. Welcome to Tullygelly, the main house in Tullygelly remaining. Nice to see you on such a nice morning. This is my brother Leslie.
Hello. Alwyn, can you explain the strange geography of where we're standing right now?
It's virtually a little island in the middle of Craigavon. So that's the way things have gone, and we're stuck with them.
So you have a few barns down here as well?
Yeah, this is where the old farmyard activity went on. They have been taken away to make room for that road.
And there's the road just there?
Yeah. We'll show you this house is being used for now. It's been used for dog kennels.
All right. You're farming dogs here now, basically,
well,
that's it?
Yes. Although he's not as active in it as my brother's not as active in it as he used to be.
Oh, I felt bad about it indeed, but sure, we couldn't do nothing about it. A lot of men turned themselves in and shot themselves more, you know. Went to their head. Very hard on them, you know, but didn't seem to worry Craigavon very much.
That big 8-wheeler rolling down the track means...
Cyril McLaughlin had just built a new bungalow for his new wife when the vesting order arrived. He lost everything, including a successful canning factory, because his land was to be one of Craigavon's industrial zones.
There was no sympathy whatsoever for the property owner in Craigavon. They've just been pushed about like cattle. They won't recognise the human beings at all. Nobody cared. They pushed them out, and as long as they got them out, that's all they worried about.
Today, Cyril's land is home to some of Craigavon's largest employers, but some of his land has never been used, and all of it, of course, is now worth a fortune.
This here was where the orchard was.
So they still haven't used this 40 years later?
That piece is not used at all. But
This was all yours?
This was all my land, it was. This here, just past the orchard, where this tree here, that was one of them that survived and not been pulled down, and it's still there to that day, and that was the entrance to where the house was and the farmyard.
And you planted that tree?
That tree was planted in 1964.
Are you leaving for the country? You say the city brings you down.
At the early stages of the development, I could see that all the existing houses, or most of them, were likely to be demolished. And so I was a bit of a photographic buff at that time, so I made it my job and interest to go around and take as many houses as possible. It's traditional for farmers to have a great love for their land. They want to keep it in the family, and they want to pass it on to their family members. And the opportunity or chance for doing that was taken away from them because of this Craigavon development. The schools were being knocked down, so the younger generation was being moved away to completely new areas that they didn't know. So it was very disruptive and very heartbreaking to the people of the area. Early 70s, I took that photograph of Mr. James Wells in front of his own house. He was so saddened and upset about all what was happening in the existing houses that it affected his health, and he didn't live all that long after that photograph was taken. So that was an example of what happened to quite a few of the farmers there.
Are you leaving for the country? You say the city brings you down.
We were a very close-knit family. Whenever my father went out from here into Killigamane, he went into a housing estate, he didn't know anyone. It wasn't a place for him, with the result that it broke his heart. Till we reared on this farm and everything going for them, happy, healthy lives, and for him to die young, and my mother to die reasonably young, it just killed them.
So the rest of your farm is under there then?
Yes, it's all under this lake here.
Did you see this lake filling up over your land?
Oh, we did, yes. It was a slow process, but eventually it filled up to what it is now, and it's quite a good recreation area now, and a good wildlife centre for water birds and wildlife generally.
Do you think you've made your peace with Craigavon after all these years?
Well, I have, but I don't know whether, if my father was here, whether he would do it, or my brother still would be resistant to say any welcome at all.
There was little chance of anyone making peace with Craigavon once the Troubles broke out. Some of the mixed housing estates worked, but some didn't. Craigavon wasn't spared shootings or bomb attacks either. But the real killer blow came in 1973 when the Development Commission was wound up, leaving the new city in the hands of dozens of direct rule NIO departments. Not surprisingly, it came way down their list of priorities. By the mid-1970s, it was obvious that Craigavon had run out of steam. Brownlow was mostly finished, but Mandeville barely existed, and there was certainly no more mention of Sectors 3 and 4, the two further new towns planned beyond Portadown and Lurgan for the year 2000.
It's in a place like this that you really get a sense of Craigavon as an unfinished city. You've got a big roundabout in the middle of nowhere with only one road in and one road out, and then this road, which goes nowhere.
The gap where Mandeville should be is Craigavon's most bizarre landscape. Underused roads and overgrown cycle paths mark out an empty grid where a town should be through neglected fields where farms should be. The gap also means that Craigavon city centre is on the edge of Craigavon and Portadown remains in splendid isolation. In 1974, the government suddenly more than tripled the allowance that was paid to people who moved to Craigavon. This smacked of desperation. It was not so much an allowance as a bribe. It also created Craigavon's first piece of urban folklore, the moonlight flit, of people coming down from Belfast, taking the money and disappearing in the middle of the night.
For the move to Craigavon, you really need a grant. You really have to get new furniture for the whole house. And 450 wouldn't furnish a house in Craigavon.
About 2 years ago, Mrs. Pat Houston, with her husband Alec and 2 young children, came to live in Ardoan, one of the newest estates in Craigavon.
The house is great, and we should have nice surroundings, but the landscaping hasn't been done in the estate yet.
Pat Houston still lives in the same house in Ardoan where she was interviewed back in the 1970s.
What did it feel like watching that film from 34 years ago?
That I put on weight, that's one of the things. And to me, it doesn't seem 30 years ago that it was done. At that time, my whole idea was to get out of Belfast. I just didn't want to bring the youngsters up in the troubles. You know, you were walking along the street sometime and you had to run into the nearest house because there was a bomb in the street or something. And I was that glad to get out of it, to tell you the truth. It was like heaven coming down here.
It wasn't heaven for Pat at first, though. She was initially allocated a house in the Rathmore estate, where poor design and a large number of vacant properties soon drove residents away. But that wasn't enough to drive her away from Craigavon.
At the beginning, there was a lot of people that come here to get the money and go away again. I mean, that was a known fact. But the people that stayed in Craigavon were the people that wanted to stay in Craigavon and wanted to see it work.
I wouldn't go back to Belfast. Although, maybe 3-4 years Craigavon will be what they say it's going to be. You know, we'll just have to wait and hope.
For a while, it looked as though Brownlow at least might prosper. Residents even put up their own town Christmas tree for a few years as a sort of unilateral declaration of independence. Then, in 1983, just 6 months after spending yet another Stormont grant on a high-tech new research centre, Goodyear suddenly announced that it was closing down its entire operation.
I worked in the Goodyear factory, and they talked of wastage, they talked of a lot of things, but they never talked of the factory closing.
They were wanting to take voluntary redundancies, etc., and they're trying to cut costs. But there was times that I can remember working in the stores where there was maybe 2 or 3 container loads of hose coming back from, say, New Zealand or Australia, and they were dumping it here in Craigavon and putting all the costs in Craigavon.
You could see the writing on the wall for the place.
The writing at times, you know.
If you were looking for it, you know.
As I say, so they were just using this as a dumping ground.
750 jobs were lost, but with no prospect of any jobs to replace them, Craigavon itself looked hopelessly redundant.
The closure of Goodyear was a shock and a disaster for Craigavon, and nobody bothered pretending any differently. The mayor of Craigavon at the time, Mr. James Gillespie, said that Goodyear had been one of the mainstays of the Craigavon new town concept from its earliest stages.
Because all of us thought, who was long-term in it from the start, thought our children would have been here, been able to educate them. It was always there, and we thought we were going to be here forever. And our children and the whole community were going to be built up in it. And all I thought was, what am I going to do now with 4 children? Oh, just disaster. It was a nightmare time. I'll never forget that.
People said we're finished. A lot of people went back to the city, and a lot of people went back, but an awful lot of people stayed.
What do you think kept Craigavon together through the 80s with no Goodyear, with no real building going on in the city centre? What kept it going?
I think it was a community spirit. You know, I mean, you'd meet somebody today and they would say, maybe an older person, oh well, things will get better, they can't get much worse.
In the year 2525.
Looking at this surviving original model from the Development Commission, what's surprising is how much of Craigavon was built in those few short years of visionary confidence. But as the scale of the disaster dawned, the history of Craigavon became a serious embarrassment to all the very clever people involved in its construction. These 4 boxes of uncatalogued photographs are all that remains of the files of the Craigavon Development Commission. They were rescued from a skip by a former employee when the Commission's Bachelor's Walk headquarters building was unceremoniously demolished.
Everything that exists in Craigavon today was planned on and built from this spot. In fact, everything was tested, everything was designed, there were laboratories, there were model makers, there were draftsmen. It all took place here. And now there's absolutely nothing left, not a trace of it, not even a plaque to say Craigavon was born here.
In the year 7510.
Des McConaughey was a town planner for the Development Commission in the late 1960s, working under Craigavon's chief planner Geoffrey Copcutt, who had already designed the Scottish new town of Cumbernauld. Copcutt quit the commission after only a year, saying, "I have become disenchanted with the Stormont scene." Des left soon after himself. This is the first time he's been back to Craigavon.
So Stormont asked a fella called Copcutt to come over, one of these visionary architects, you know, big beard like this, you know, wow, sparks all over the place. He was going to build a great terrace, 50 or 60 feet high, 3 miles long, through the centre of the whole thing, and a rapid transit system. Do you believe this? A rapid transit system from the centre of Oregon to the centre of Portadown, through the whole thing, you know? I went to Stormont and said, the hell with this. Let's have a regional city from Carrickfergus to Portadown with half an hour travel time, rapid transit systems, and then let it rip. And the Stormont said, piss off, go on, get on with your regional city.
Badly designed housing was often blamed for Craigavon's problems. Perhaps experimental architecture in an experimental city was an experiment too far.
When you were working on the plans for Craigavon, was there any conception amongst you or your colleagues that this sort of thing could happen?
No. No. Everybody knows that things can go wrong, right? But you don't plan for things going wrong. They're just people that draw plans, build houses.
H.G. Wells said, "Cycle paths shall abound in utopia." Then again, H.G. Wells also believed in free love, eugenics and the League of Nations.
What was the thinking behind the cycle paths in Craigavon?
Cycle path, 60 miles of pedestrian cycle track, where you had vehicles all on one side. On the other side, people would walk to school and walk to other amenities and cycle when they used to walk, you know.
But I mean, we don't have anything like this anywhere in the rest of Northern Ireland. It's a really, really high quality system.
It's lovely. I love it. You know, well, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely. Is it used now?
Well, I certainly used it when I lived here.
On the way here for cyclists or anything?
Let me see. There's a sort of naive idealism about all of this. Do you think that applied to the plan as a whole?
The relationship between the whole physical environment, you know, and human behaviour is a thimble full of guesses, really. You're only approximating. With the environment that I left, frankly, the new building and the new housing was lovely. Lovely environment. It was lovely. But the whole point is, it's not just the house, it's who's in the house and whether those people in the house are moving that way or moving that way. Now, if the people in the house are moving that way in their search for wealth or power, prestige or money or good jobs, if they're moving downwards, forget it. You're going to have a lousy environment, you're going to have dreadful housing. If they're moving that way, it's going to be okay. It's nothing to do with the bricks and mortar. In Craigavon, they were moving that way, and there you had to knock the houses down.
Well, we know all that now. But Craigavon's original vision was about more than architecture, economics, or the vagaries of people going up or down. There was a powerful ideology at work here, a belief that a new city and its new inhabitants would raise each other up to new heights, freed from the squalor of the past by new patterns of scientific living, based on clean, rational, ordered geometry.
So when the planners showed sketches of people sipping cocktails on city centre balconies or high-speed trains whizzing into glass central stations, they really believed that this was going to happen.
Attention, the 0830 Craigavon to Belfast will depart from platform 7.
There would be a high-speed train running down the central reservation of a high-speed motorway. People would also walk and cycle above it all to their jobs in modern factories and offices. Their homes would be bright and spacious and regimentally classless. Their city centre would be a shopping centre with everything under one ingeniously suspended roof. Their leisure time would be sailing and canoeing, not kicking a ball around the streets. The only segregation would be segregated transport. And urban sophistication itself could be part of the urban plan. OK, it didn't turn out to plan. But when does anything ever turn out to plan? What matters today is that Craigavon exists and it is a real place. 20,000 people live here, over 1,000 more arrive each year. The half-empty layout is ideal for new developments, commuting, retail warehousing, and all the other aspects of modern life that would no doubt have appalled a 60s planner. Slowly, Craigavon's gaps are filling in with people and businesses who don't have to be bribed to come here. Much of this growth is driven by immigration, and where better to make your start in a new country than a place where you're not much more of a blow-in than everyone else.
It's strange to think that when this leisure centre was built, Craigavon was having trouble attracting people from Belfast, and now this leisure centre can field basketball teams and football teams from countries all over the world.
The original wave of settlers was a wave where they all came together, but these people are coming in individually.
Craigavon it's growing in a more natural sort of state now.
Is, yeah. And it's looking well.
So you think it was worth all the mistakes to achieve this?
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. But you didn't know that when you were 21, but you definitely now, 40 years later, yes, no doubt.
Is this something you feel that you could be proud to have been involved with?
Jein, which is German for ja and nein. Yes and no. Sorry.
That sounded almost like an apology, and perhaps Craigavon was all a ridiculous mistake. But it's done now, and there's no point being sorry anymore.